Did you want to say anything to start us off, Katie?
Just thank you guys so much for coming and for taking time out of your day to educate some of Panhellenics women about mental health. This is so important to us, and I really appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks for having us. All right. Well, I am really excited to be able to facilitate this conversation about mental health in this week of wellness education. There are many facets that, of being human, and our mental health is something that can make a really big difference on how our days go and how our relationships go and how our academics go and so many other things. So, my hope today is just that through some questions, some Q&A time, and we're taking questions through the chat, we'd be able to help answer a lot of questions about mental health. What is it? What is counseling? How does it work? Why is this important? And I've invited some experts, other experts on campus to join me in the conversation. So I'm Lindsay Clark. I'm a university counselor. I've been here at Sanford for 6 years, and I'm also our wellness coordinator. So this event just fits perfectly into some of my interests and my hope to educate students on mental health and wellness. I'm going to pass the ball and we'll just go around and you can hear from each of the participants, the panelists, about who they are and what expertise they bring to the conversation or what their experience is with mental health. April Robinson, if you'll go next.
Sure. I'm April Robinson, and I serve as Assistant Vice President for Student Development and Support in Student Affairs and Enrollment Management. And I think I'm on this call today because really the reason I get up and come to work every day is to make sure that students are being as successful as possible in and beyond the classroom, which really comes back often to their own personal wellness. So it's really difficult to be very successful academically or in organizations or leadership if you don't have personal wellness. And so I oversee the Office of Counseling and Wellness. I oversee the Sanford Care Team. I work and oversee the Office of Student Leadership and Involvement, which is all about making sure students have a place to belong and work out their own meaning and find community. And then I also oversee a retention team that is a group of people that get together to talk about why are students staying and thriving and why are students leaving, and how do we learn from both of those populations and figure out how to keep doing the things that are working and improve the things that aren't. So I'm delighted to be a part of this conversation today and listen and learn from my colleagues on this call, and hopefully share a little bit of encouragement and maybe some specific information or resources that will be helpful to people who listen to this call who are interested in really improving their own personal wellness.
Teresa, why don't you go next?
Sure. I'm Teresa Prince, and I am in my second semester. I'm finishing up my internship here with Sanford and have been so grateful for this opportunity. Counseling for me is a second career, and I came to it with a heart to work with families, primarily betrayed spouses and couples trying to rebuild their marriage. But through this internship, have found a love for adolescents and young adults, and seen just how these patterns that we have, and our parents are doing the best they can, we're doing the best we can, and we still sometimes have coping ways of coping that work against us. They might have worked when we were younger and they turn on us when we're adults. And so it's a real joy to work in this college population and navigate those places where, this is what I did to survive, but something about it doesn't feel right now. And so as you're growing in your independence and really discovering who you are, it's a joy to be able to walk with you in the counseling center. And my specialty certifications, I am doing certification as a certified sex addiction therapist, um, EFT, emotionally focused therapy, and then EMDR and brain spotting for trauma work. So it's great to be here with you all.
Thanks, Teresa. Jennifer, why don't you go next?
Hi, my name is Jennifer Griffith. I am a part-time counselor here. A little bit about my background is I graduated counseling program in 2018, and I'm working on my LPC. And I have a few more hours to go, but I work here part-time at Sanford and also a local nonprofit counseling center. And there I see a lot of young adults, a lot of middle-aged adults. I have worked with kids before, but I really have enjoyed my time here at Sanford. And thank you so much for the opportunity to be here.
Thanks, Jennifer. And last but not least, Jonathan, if you'll introduce yourself, please.
Thanks. It's nice to be here. My name's Jonathan Davis, and I've been at Sanford since 2002, which I guess is probably, I don't know, April, have you been here longer than I have? So yeah, so 2 more years longer than I have. And so what that means is it might have been at Sanford longer than some of our visitors have been alive, which is kind of sobering for me to think about. But I have been on the faculty of the Human Development and Family Science Department at Sanford for all that time. The department name has changed over the years, but that's been the same department. But I think the reason I'm here today is most of my training and background is actually in clinical work and working with folks who are struggling in various ways in a counseling setting. So I have an LMFT, which is a little bit different than what Jennifer was talking about. She's working on finishing her licensed professional counselor license, and I have a license. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. And so much of what we do is similar, but my training is focused a little bit more maybe on the family interaction and family dynamics side of things, and maybe a little bit less on things like addictions and other stuff. And Jennifer, correct me if I'm wrong. But that's you know, in many respects our training is similar, very similar. In Alabama, in fact, I think it just is 1 or 2 courses that maybe make a difference in terms of the training that we have for these 2 kinds of certification for doing counseling in Alabama. So I'm an LMFT, and I've practiced just seeing a few clients a week ever since 2004 at a nonprofit off campus that's affiliated with the United Methodist Church. So so I've seen a lot of, worked with a lot of clergy who have been struggling and the folks that they refer to this nonprofit. So a lot of families, couples, some folks who are college students, other folks who are older, family caregivers, all kinds of different situations. And that's one of the things that I really love about what I do is I feel like it enriches the time that I have with my students on campus, because it gives some rich context that I can bring to the classroom, because I work with families in all kinds of different challenging situations in real life as well. Another reason why I'm guessing maybe Lindsay invited me here is I have a little bit of a background in working with college students who are having relationship difficulties as well, because I for about 4 years, I managed a grant from the Department of Justice to help Sanford and all of the neighboring institutions in Birmingham, like Birmingham Southern and UAB, Miles College, Montevallo, helping those institutions to address problems of interpersonal violence between students, things like stalking, sexual assault, dating violence that sometimes happen when you have a lot of people who are all developmentally looking at new relationships, trying out and independence from their parents for the first time, so there's a lot of opportunity for things like that to happen, and so the campus program that I worked with for a number of years was designed to address the unique needs of college environments, because it is a special place, and we want it to be the safest place and the most healthy place that it can be. So that's part of the reason why I'm here too, I think. So anyway, that's my introduction.
Thanks so much, Jonathan. Well, you've kicked us off in a direction. I was going to start off with a question, a general question. What is mental health? I think we need a good working definition of this. But the second part to that is, what is unique about college mental health or young adult mental health? Because there is a lot of change going on now that makes someone's mental health between age 18 and, let's say, 25 different than younger adolescents or older adults. So let's start a conversation about some different ways we would just try to define what is mental health. Feel free to jump in, or I'll jump in.
One thing I would say is that health, it's easier for me to define what it is not.
Okay.
It is not failing to try hard enough. It is not a lack of faith. It's not a mistake. It's not a personal failing. It's something that is an aspect of our health in many ways very similar to other aspects of our health. So it's affected by the things that we do, for sure. It's affected by the things that happen to us. The practices that we do, all of those affect our mental health, just like they affect our physical health. And it's distinct from all of those things as well. So anyway, maybe that's a start. I don't want to conversation, but that's kind of what I think of initially.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like to talk with students about gauges of health. And so we talk about physical health, mental health, relational health, academic health. There are lots of different iterations of health in our life that contribute to our effectiveness as a person, our experience of meaning, and so a couple of specific gauges, like for physical health, we identify as our temperature, our ability to breathe, our ability to move, our mobility, so there are these gauges that we use to measure physical health that we never apologize if something's off and we need to do something different to kind of tend to our physical needs. And so I like to think about what are those kinds of gauges in the other realms of health in our lives. And mental health, I would say, what is our stress level? What is our ability to focus on things that are important to us? What are our levels of distraction? Or, it's emotional, it's also mental or intellectual, but it's legitimate. I really appreciated some of the distinction that Jonathan offered as well, to say it's separate from these other parts of our health, but they're also connected as well. And my hope is, in talking with students, to feature mental health as equally important. And we can also measure things about our mental health. It's not completely elusive or mysterious. We just have to train ourselves to pay attention to what our mental temperature is, to what our mental blood pressure is, and to give ourselves permission to respond to those indicators in the same way that we would the physical indicators that are saying, hey, something's not optimal here. We need to make a change. So those are some of the ways I like to think about mental health and frame it with students.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I mean, mental health is not the absence of illness. Like we can have struggles and still be healthy. Mental health is on a continuum, just like our physical health. And so there's always more we can strive for, and more tools we can put in place. And so I think sometimes when we feel like, oh no, if I think I need counseling, or if I admit that I'm depressed, is there something seriously wrong with me? In some ways, sometimes it's just our body coping with more stress than we're equipped to handle for a longer period of time. So to know like we're on a continuum of it, and you don't have to think like, "Ugh, I'm just broken, I'm sick." It doesn't necessarily mean that.
Mhm. And I like to emphasize, we've talked about emotions and thoughts, and our mental health is affected by our experiences, abuse and trauma, if we're in healthy or toxic relationships. Our mental health is also tied to our brain in a lot of ways, which is a physical organ. And I think often that can be left out of the conversation when I think about, you said, Jonathan, it's not trying hard enough or not having enough faith, because our brain functions on chemicals and hormones and a lot of stuff every day. And so there can be a physical base to the way our brain is functioning or working against us. And I think that's really important to remember in the conversation of mental health. So what is distinct about this time in college and young adult mental health that is good for the college students listening to be mindful of?
Well, they are really close to their brains being all the way developed. I mean, unfortunately, it's mid-20s before your brain is all the way on board. And I think just knowing that though, because up until that point, you really operate in 15-second horizons. 15 seconds ago, I was fine. So certainly I can do this. And so we might make decisions that aren't necessarily the safest for us or the best for us. And you're in this window where you are making some pretty big life decisions. So knowing like it's a pretty significant time to really search out what I want, and bring in some consultation, and know that my brain might not quite be there and might not give me my very best answers until those mid-20s.
Mhm. Yeah. I also return to Eric Erickson's stages of psychosocial development and think about how important it is at this time, kind of between two stages, one being identity and role confusion, but really figuring out who am I and where do I belong. And this other stage has to do with intimacy. So as you understand who you are, what does that mean about if I can achieve and be in healthy, intimate relationships? And so all of that really is how we are in relationship to others. And moving away from home, as many college students do who come to Sanford, and being able to explore their identity away from parents. It just, I think that there's a lot of pressure and a lot of emotion around, relationships. A lot of the counseling I do in one way or another in our office has to do with navigating relationships, whether that's with parents or peers or in dating. And so I think it's good to acknowledge that, yeah, that's a really significant thing that's going on in your development, that relationships are going to take on a lot of weight and significance. So that's one thing that comes to my mind. I think the differentiation process is always also, worth noting. Sometimes students have a hard time differentiating from their parents, saying, okay, even if you believe this or do things this way, I may now choose to do things differently or believe differently. But parents can also have a really difficult time in the differentiation process. And so that's something else that we talk through in our office. It may not feel like as much work for a student to do, but it is, and in terms of maybe having to navigate their relationship with their parents in new ways, and how to do that with responsibly and staying true to yourself. But that growing independence.
And I think boundaries come up a lot around that conversation. And I say all the time, boundaries keep us safe and sane. So if you have these moments where you don't feel safe, or you feel like, oh my goodness, you just feel like, why are my thoughts so out of control? It's a great opportunity and time to think about like, what boundaries might I consider that could keep me safe and sane? And that helps us navigate relationships in a way that we don't have to escape or like attack, but we can really kind of own how we want to enter in and respond rather than react in some of these situations for connection that we have.
Mhm, mhm. One of my favorite things about working with college students is I see that it's such a time of possibility. And the phrase, Teresa, I think you used it in your introduction, but thinking about how we've gone often for 18 or so years coping with life and navigating life in a particular way. And sometimes we get to a stage in life like college and being away from parents where you realize maybe the way I've been navigating life isn't working anymore. And this is a great time to adapt and to adjust and to add new skills and coping tools to your, to your toolbox. And because there is so much life ahead of you. So sometimes, it can be easy to feel stuck, like, oh, am I always going to feel this way or be this way? But this is such a transitional time. And I think it's a wonderful time, especially since counseling is free in our office, to do, a lot of work to set yourself up for even more success, as you launch into, post college life. Yeah. Well, our counseling office, is located on a Christian campus, and we've made references a few times to the Christian faith, and I really want that to be a part of our conversation and in this next question. But um, how does our faith work for us in our understanding of mental health and our capacity to be mentally well? And also, what are the ways sometimes where faith is pushed up against conversations of mental health in an oppositional way or an incompatible way? I think it would be really helpful to talk through that because I know that keeps students and individuals sometimes from seeking counseling because there can be something about what they've learned from their faith community that may make it feel like it means they're weak or don't have enough faith. Or so I want to talk more explicitly about how our faith works for us, and then sometimes how it unnecessarily gets in the way.
Well, I'm happy to jump on this because I'm very passionate about finding healthy ways to talk about faith and to utilize faith in our own personal and communal process of healing and restoration, because that's really what Jesus was about. He said, I came for the sick, whatever that meant. I mean, people could be perfectly fine physically or mentally, but they could be very spiritually sick, or they could, any combination. That's who Jesus was really interested in, because he wanted to lead people to healing and wholeness. And so it's really heart-wrenching to me when I hear people framing mental health and faith as oppositional to one another, as if you're not praying hard enough, or you're not reading your Bible enough, or you're not, fill in whatever spiritual discipline or practice, and that's the explanation for why you're struggling with anxiety or depression, or again, fill in the blank there. And that's, that just is so discouraging, because it's just, first of all, my understanding of scripture is that's not biblical. There's no foundation for suggesting that we have to try harder. And Jonathan, it was one of the things that you said, mental health is not, being mentally healthy is not about trying harder or trying something different. It's not that simple. So I like to just remind students all the time that if we are having a mental struggle or difficulty or illness, that is not an indicator of our spiritual health. Just like we would say that if I've broken my leg and I'm hobbling around on crutches, that doesn't indicate that I've got a mental health issue. There's not a direct correlation there. And so to be able to deal with those independently, but yet interdependently, is, I think, the best approach. And that's what Jesus did. He saw the whole person. And he was interested in the whole person, their physical, financial, mental being, all of them. Jesus wanted all of everyone all the time. And so I think when we are talking about mental health and we're talking about wellness, it's important not to weaponize faith, either just as the solution or the problem, but to say faith is a part of the formula for sure. How whatever role faith plays in people's lives, we want to tap into that, but I just want us to be careful that we don't oversimplify, you know, mental health, especially mental health illnesses, that we don't oversimplify that by making it just, an easy spiritual fix. There's definitely interconnectedness between our beings. We're not just compartmentalized. But I never want to make the mistake with students of suggesting that the solution to whatever our mental health issues may be is simply higher levels of spirituality. We saw some really spiritual people in the Gospels that were jacked up, in terms of mental health. They had some whacked out ideas about the world and about forgiveness, or, so that's what I would offer on that. I'm sure that's not a complete thought. Hopefully it's there's some value in that for those of you listening to this, because I do think Jesus was all about setting people free. And that process included both spiritual truth, like emotional truth, mental truth, and relational truth.
I think it's one of the joys of being a clinical mental health counselor who is a Christian, because before, like, I did lay ministry and try, and we helped a lot of people, but understanding the clinical mental health side too, and it really made the scripture that we're fearfully and wonderfully made come alive. Because a lot of us, a lot of people are faced with trauma. 1 in 3 women will be sexually abused. There's just so much out there that God never intended for us to navigate. But because of the fall, this is where we live. And trauma is stored in the body, not in a linear way that we can just go in and say, this scripture takes care of that trauma, and this scripture will help you with that trauma. Trauma doesn't have words a lot of times. I mean, we are acting out of our emotional brain, and all the smarts do not get the message. And so trauma is fragmented. And so to be able to sit with clients as a Christian who is a clinical mental health counselor and allow room for lament, to just cry out in the pain, the devastation, I've never told anyone this, and I can't believe I'm telling you. And can anyone love me knowing what's in here, what I've been through, what I've done? And yes, the answer is yes. And so it really is a calling and a honor. And so just for those listening, know that you do not have to suffer in silence, that think that you've got to handle it on your own. And so ask for a counselor who's a Christian, but who will work with you from that clinical mental health side, because it's bringing those two things together that, I mean, the healing is phenomenal. And I've experienced it. I mean, I grew up a people pleaser and thought I can be good enough. And I mean, every scripture that was going to cheer me on to be good enough, I tried it and I was exhausted and ready to just walk out on my marriage, because the problems got bigger than I could keep handling. And so just to say, like, wow, to be on, and God spared my marriage through Beeson Divinity School. So to be back at Sanford's a real gift. But yeah, my heart is for people to know, like, I used to think counselors were crazy. So I always say God has a sense of humor, because I was like, no, I do not want to marry anyone in the ministry. And I think counselors are crazy. I went through some really big stuff when I was 16, finding out that to have a child would be a surrogate or a adoption. And I was like, my mom was like, you want to go see a counselor? I was like, absolutely not. And I mean, so now to be one, it's just a different time. And so I love to tell people, like, please, if you feel that prompting to go and not just suffer alone.
why don't we talk just a little bit about the differences between a counselor and a mentor or a pastor, because this is a question I get often in our office. Well, I've been doing mentorship with someone at my church or talking to my pastor about this. And I'm wondering how this will be any different. So we probably touched on that a little bit, but I wondered if any of y'all want to speak to that, because there's definitely different value in those different kind of voices, but making that distinction can help students know when coming for counseling is really the right thing to do based on their need or struggle. One of the things I remember kind of having an aha moment about in grad school was them talking about how a therapist really should be unbiased, right? So you can't counsel your best friend and think that the process is gonna, go well, probably. But also that this idea of being somewhat of a blank slate, so your client is able to kind of project a lot of different things onto you that they need to work out. And sometimes when someone knows too much about you, which is why therapists, are thoughtful about their own personal disclosure, you're wanting your client to be able to talk freely about whatever they need to talk about. And not fear that if they know too much about you, then they may start to hide parts of them if they fear rejection or whatever. And so I think that's helpful because often mentors or relationships with youth pastors or pastors are very friendly, and you really know a lot about someone, and that's a real asset in a different kind of way, right? Like if I wanted to be encouraged or comforted by my sister or parent, that I need that kind of counsel and encouragement from someone who knows me. And sometimes, but often when you're working through things that may include your family members or other dynamics, you really are wanting someone to be objective. And it is easier to be objective when you just don't know so much about someone, right? And so that's one of the things that I think can be so helpful. In thinking about, okay, how do I know when it may be helpful to see a counselor? I kind of want to start fresh and have someone with new eyes be able to look at what I'm feeling or what I've gone through and help me assess what's the next step forward. Is there anything else that y'all would add to that?
One thing, one analogy I often use when I explain to people my approach to counseling is, and how it relates to my faith, is I think of of a comparison almost about where we're walking along a path. So when I imagine what a lot of pastors do, and I'm not a pastor, so I may be misstating this, but a lot of pastors, when you meet with them, they'll do is offer scripture and truth to someone who comes to them as a way of supporting and helping that person cope with whatever is a struggle for that person. So they'll point that person to Jesus, and they will try to maybe strengthen the person's context around them. They will do everything they can to kind of help that person find meaning, maybe in the pain that they're experiencing, because those are all things that, and it's spiritual disciplines, for example, taking a Sabbath. That's a great example of something that is grounded in religion, even that word, and is good for our mental health too. And so I think pastors have a lot of tools that they can bring to someone who comes to them and point them in the direction of Jesus. And I view my role as a counselor who is a Christian, kind of as Teresa was saying, as not necessarily pointing you toward Jesus, but walking with you wherever you are toward Jesus. To me, that's different, because that means that I'm not necessarily providing a lot of pointing and direction. And what it means is that I also am not there to kind of help to tell you what direction we need to go. So I'm there to walk with you and support you as I believe Jesus would. And so to me, that's a very different understanding. It kind of come back to what April was saying. It's very interconnected with what pastors do, but it's distinct from that. And so one of the reasons it's distinct, I think, and one of the reasons why I value what I do is I don't feel any compulsion to judge anyone who's coming to me or to tell them what they're doing is morally right or wrong. And I think pastors sometimes feel limited that way. So, and so if you're, for example, struggling with an issue that you're not sure what your faith or your religion would say about that. So sexual issues, for example, come to mind, right? Things like sexual orientation, gender identity, things like that. If you're not sure how your pastor is going to respond to that, maybe it's good to go to a counselor and kind of help sort through some of those things rather than to approach your pastor first. I don't know. That's just something that came to mind. I could be wrong about that. People's needs are different, but those are areas where I feel like, for example, I can walk with someone who has an addiction. A pastor might approach an addiction very differently than I might approach an addiction. And so being able to walk with someone as they emerge from that and help them find better health is going to look different from my perspective than I think it might for a pastor. And again, I'm not a pastor, so I don't want to speak too much for that. But that's kind of how I conceptualize it in my mind. One, pointing someone a certain way. That's a good way, usually, and it has authority attached to it. But me kind of walking with someone as I imagine Jesus would, not pointing them a certain way, but just being where they are and walking along that path with them.
And also with counseling, I love that, Jonathan. And it's those things we hide, those secrets that hold a lot of power and create shame. You start to feel bad about who you are. And shame feeds into an addictive cycle. So when we hurt, we're going to medicate we're going to medicate pain. And a lot of times the way we medicate pain are substances or drugs or process addictions, sex addictions, different things. But then what was I going to say? The confidentiality in counseling, like when you go to see your pastor, it's wonderful if you have that support, but you're also going to see them a lot of times when you're in church, and you might feel some kind of way about the things you've shared. When you come to Sanford's counseling office or to a counselor, they are ethically bound to confidentiality. So anything that's shared with me in a session, I can't go, even if I see you on campus, I would not even acknowledge that I knew you to protect your confidentiality. You could say, "Hey, Teresa," and then I would talk to you. But if I passed you, if I was at the student center, standing right next to you at Chick-fil-A, I would act like I didn't know you and give you that right to talk to me if you wanted to. So we are very careful with your stories legally. And it's just, we want to hold that place for you, that safe place. And so you don't have that weird feeling like, oh, they know all this about me. And do I regret saying that now? So just another kind of piece of it, I think.
And like some of y'all have already noted, there are a lot of different certifications and trainings that therapists go through to really be an expert around particular areas like addiction and trauma or grief or eating disorders, that a general person or a pastor is not going to have the certification in. So when you think about like deep-rooted struggles or problems that you're really having to get down into and do long-term work and intense work, complex work, for sure that's something you can seek out in a counselor. And a counselor, you can look at counselors that are trained in whatever area of specialty may be helpful. Yeah. I want to remind the participants you're welcome to put questions in the chat box that we'll respond to. Yeah. What would be some typical things someone may come to counseling for? You know, when we think about mental wellness, what are the kind of signs that would indicate to a student, maybe this is something that would be helpful for me to use the counseling office, you know, as a resource for? I'll start us off. One of the most simple phrases that I think is helpful is when you feel like you're just not yourself. And for a good a bit of time, you know, I may have off days. People have off days or down days. Maybe you don't get the score on an exam you were hoping for. But when you start to really feel not like yourself and it's persistent and it affects the way that you can be in relationships or your attention and focus, and if you want to get out of bed and your appetite, I mean, lots of things. That's a really good indicator. You know yourself better than anyone else. And so even if other people aren't picking up on it because you're doing a really good job, you know, acting as if everything's okay, typically we have a sense internally when we're just not ourselves. So that's one kind of basic way to think about it. What else would y'all add to that?
I see a lot of the family systems that end up coming out in college, like people who, you know, their home life was one thing, and now they come to college and they're just like, wait, I can't. No one hears me. I can't find my voice, or they just feel like every relationship goes bad. What's happened? Like it seems like every friendship I make, it's falling apart. And so those are some things too to kind of navigate. Like, what's the pattern in that? Can we look for patterns in there? And just some interpersonal, interrelational things.
I've seen a lot of students, you know, that struggle with anxiety, and it's, you know, it's my parents always did this for me, and you know, just the simplest things like I'm having to do my own laundry now. I'm having to, you know, make sure that I eat, or you know, things like that. And so it's the little things that you know that you wouldn't, I don't know, maybe you wouldn't think people would struggle with, but it's just the uncertainty. And so,
Yeah.
little things.
I'm glad you brought anxiety up, Jennifer, because I think it's one of the top things we see in our office. And if it's not the initial presenting issue that someone starts to talk about, it's secondary. It's, you know, in the room. And I've begun to really see that anxiety and high stress can be like a badge of honor sometimes. Like the more stressed or anxious I am, it must mean that I'm like doing a lot. Like, so, you know, and there's value and worth in that. And so I think sometimes people are really out of touch with how anxiety and stress is affecting them. And on top of, you know, the things they may be doing academically, if you are balancing all of those little things, like you were referring to, like managing your meals and laundry and taking care of your car and keeping up long distance relationships, I mean, all the things that you don't always realize, you know, when you live in a household with parents or caregivers, you don't have to think about a lot of that. And so it's all of those kind of cumulative stresses that can really add up. So I think anxiety is a big one, and it really can impact our ability to pay attention and focus, which is key, you know, in our academic endeavors. So anxiety is definitely something you want to be aware of. And it increases your heart rate. It can make you nervous socially. It can impact sleep. Yeah.
I added some good indicating thoughts that might sort of be an alert that counseling could be helpful. So if any of you want to add some in there, I was typing some of the things that you all were saying and then adding some things like, even when students come to me and say, I just feel like I'm always stressed. I'm always on edge. Or they say, I just can't shut my brain off. I just can't quit thinking about things, even though I know they're not that important, or, that I just can't quit. I feel out of control. Or I can't sleep. I try to drink time tea and meditate. I can't sleep. I'm like, okay, those are really good indicators that something needs to be adjusted. And no wonder you're not functioning, or don't feel like yourself. If you're not sleeping, you don't have any appetite, or your brain never turns off. That's not how we were designed to operate. That would be like leaving your car running all the time. It's not good for the engine. It's going to run out of gas. So I think those were some great, prompts, and those are all really good indicators. Just like us having a fever is an indicator that we need to pay attention, that something's going on. Those are good. Those are good indicators to pay attention to. I work with a lot of students who are just trying to transition, quite honestly. Like several of you were making reference to, this is a very natural time of development, maturation, and change. But it is very disorienting to a lot of students who come to college and have not been completely responsible for themselves, or even primarily, or in part responsible for themselves. And so helping them to sort of build out a new support system of mentors, counselors, professors that can speak into their transition and help them like regain their footing. Teaching students how to ask for help. I actually offer help to a lot of students every day, and it's mind-boggling how many of them just ignore me or don't respond. And I'm like, okay, wow, we've got a lot of work to do in really helping this generation feel comfortable just accepting help, much less asking for it. So, that's one of the messages I would want to just highlight in neon for anyone listening to this. If you are feeling disoriented, or you're struggling, or you're even asking the question, is this normal? Should I
Right.
be having this much trouble like with this? Then just ask at least. It's not going to hurt anything to make an appointment with someone and process about it. So I really like the ideas of just identifying what might be some good indicators that a conversation with a counselor could be helpful. You don't have to be in all out crisis to benefit from a conversation. And I'm just going to give a personal testimony. When I was a sophomore at Sanford, I didn't even know I was a child of an alcoholic. I knew that beer was a problem in my house. I had no idea my dad was an alcoholic until I was sitting in Charlotte Freeman's psychology class, and she started describing what it was, and I almost fainted because it was so like mind blowing to me that that's what had been going on. That was the family system that was the problem. And so then I knew I had a problem, but I didn't know what to do. So I started praying more about it, because I was a super good Christian girl at Sanford. And thank God, I had a spiritual mentor in my life who said to me, have you considered counseling? And I said, Jonathan, you'll appreciate this. Jesus is the answer to any problem I might have, And thank goodness for some wise people that were like, girl, no, it's okay. You need to go see a counselor. And I sat with my arms crossed. We had a part-time counselor, one that was on campus 2 days a week, hashtag Bart Grooms. And I went to see him and was like totally shut down and closed. And he said the most powerful words to me. He said, April, do you believe that God brings people into your life to encourage you and support you and to help you put words to prayers you don't even know to pray, questions you don't even know to ask, answers you don't even know to seek? And I said, yeah, I do. He said, name some of those people. And I started naming youth ministers and teachers and friends. And he said, I'm just another one of those people that God has put in your path. Let me help you. Talk to me. Changed my life. Changed my attitude about counseling for reals on the spot. And I'm a believer now, and I'm an evangelist. I tell the good news about the power of counselors. And y'all, come on. Like we refer to God as counselor. Counselor. I mean, you know, like it's in music. So I'm a fan.
I know a couple students are having to step out, and I do, maybe as we wrap up our time, I want to answer one of the questions that Bethany had posted. But what would be our advice when we see someone who's struggling with mental health? Like, what would we encourage a student to say to their peer that may be struggling? So that's a really great practical question. How do students support one another when they see one another struggling?
I think I think it comes to a place. Again, another thing I say all the time is we can only control ourselves. So sometimes we make it our mission to like fix the people around us, and that's not gonna go anywhere. I mean, but we can be really mindful of what we're doing. And, you know, I was just thinking, and this is a little bit off of that topic, but while we're here and we're going to be sharing this, so many times, again, with our brains in that not quite developed, we think, oh, I mean, a little bit of, and I'm not saying no alcohol, no nothing, but a lot of times, like alcohol, weed, I'm hearing so much about, oh, you know, about microdosing. It's actually kind of good for me. And I can, and so there's so many things that we just think won't hurt us. Um, but then we need more and more and more and more to get that same feeling. And so this is off of that question, a tangent, but I was just feeling kind of burdened to say it because in private practice, I meet with a lot who they're telling me about this. And so just to notice if you're in this place where you're like, wait, I used to just go out and have a couple drinks, and now I'm wanting to drink every night and I'm drinking by myself. Doesn't matter if I'm with my friends. Like some of those are good alarm bells for you to make sure you reach out and get help because these things escalate. And most of the time, stuff that we use to medicate our pain in our teens and our 20s don't really damage our life enough to need help or to bottom out until our mid 30s. And so it's when you're married and you think, oh, I've got this life that I've always wanted. And then these things emerge. So I would just say, as college students, if you notice there's things you're doing that are becoming, you want more and more, or you're doing it in isolation, like it would be a really great time to really look out for that and to reach out now before you have the life you want and then you're faced with a lot bigger problems. And so what was that other question? Oh, so I don't know that you can help your friends too much except for tell them there's a counseling center on campus, maybe try it. And then just kind of leave it there and don't try and fix. I would say that was the first big eye opener for me sitting on this side, is hearing how many college students were annoyed with the people that were trying to fix them, from their parents to their friends. And it changed the way I parent. I mean, at first I was like, oh man, I really think they love you. But I can see through their eyes now how many messages we give people that we really want them to behave the way makes us feel most comfortable. And at the end of the day, God has a plan for all of us. My motto that came out of counseling and clinical mental health was be who God created you to be. And I think when we're really seeking that out, there's a lot of places we can go with it that are really beautiful.
I wanted to also just throw in though that I think there is certainly, you know, the question, like Teresa's saying, of, you know, is this person's behavior a problem for me or is it a problem for them, right? You know, and that's an important question to distinguish. If it's something I don't like about what they're doing, maybe that's my concern, maybe that's my issue, right? But on the other hand, if you see someone who you care about who's spiraling downward, I really think that, especially in the South, we have a hesitancy to speak up and to, I'm worried about you. And because it's not something people want to hear necessarily. I think what Teresa says, right, you know, we don't generally welcome people telling us what to do. But one thing that sometimes you can do is you can point to specific behaviors You know, like the other day when we were sitting together in class, I noticed your hands were shaking a lot. And I'm just worried about you. I wonder if everything's okay. Or, you know, the other night, I heard you talking about how you hadn't slept for 2 days in a row. And I just got worried about you. Are you doing okay? You know, and actually that last question, are you doing okay, is probably not a great one because it's a yes or no question. Maybe it's better just to stick with our own feelings that we have. Like, I'm worried about you, and I want you to be healthy. So one of the things to do, I think, when we're trying to reach out to somebody is first check ourselves. Check, am I in a good place where I can express love for this person rather than my own kind of preferences for this person? And then to use those I statements and say, I maybe I saw this, and just stop that. And maybe that speaks enough that, you know, I'm your friend and I saw this. And let them respond, you know, to say, well, no, that was nothing, or I'm okay, or yeah, you're right. I'm not doing too good. And that opens up all kinds of good stuff in that conversation.
Thanks so much, Jonathan. Thank you all for participating today and adding value to our conversation. I am hopeful and trust that we have definitely raised the awareness of mental health, and hopefully deepened this understanding that the students are taking away from this conversation, so that they can better monitor their own mental health and help those around them know how to take better care. So thank y'all for participating today. Have a great time.